So I'd like to just welcome everyone. My name is Rebecca Caro Cohen. I'm the executive editor of the Arizona Journal of Environmental Law and Policy, known as AJELP, here at the University of Arizona. And we are truly excited to welcome all of you here to the James E. Rogers College of Law. Those of you who are joining us physically in the room right now, and those of you who are joining us virtually. We had over 400 people register for this symposium, which is very exciting. And we are proud to announce that over 75 tribal nations and Indigenous peoples from around the world are represented within that event. This speaks to the deep interest in and relevance of the topic that we'll be discussing today and tomorrow, which is Indigenous land stewardship. AJELP is honored to play a role in facilitating these conversations, which are more urgent than ever before, and centering Indigenous voices, perspectives, and experiences. I want to start off the evening by first offering a land acknowledgement. University of Arizona and the city of Tucson, where we're hosting the symposium today, sit within the ancestral homelands of the Thalnautham, the desert people. Their traditional territory stretched from what is now Hermosillo in Sonora, south of the US-Mexico border, to what is now Phoenix, west to the Gulf of California, and east to the San Pedro River. Today, Pima County is home to 2 of the 22 federally recognized tribal nations in Arizona, the Thalnautham Nation and the Pascoyaqui Tribe. I know for many, land acknowledgements themselves are intended as a tool to educate and raise awareness about Indigenous peoples' deep history and continuing presence and caretaking of these lands can seem shallow and performative. They don't necessarily lead to concrete action that supports Indigenous communities and works toward restorative justice. They're symbolic. Symbolic statements can have an important role to play, though, as we have seen much more recently with the Vatican formally repudiating the doctrine of discovery last week, an act that I know many people thought would never happen. But symbolic statements like land acknowledgements and the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery are the first step, the least that we can do as non-Indigenous people to address the ongoing destructive effects of European colonization on Indigenous peoples in the Americas over the past 500 years. What must accompany these symbolic statements then is action. AJELP is an academic journal, but what we hope you learn from this symposium, we hope that what you learn from this symposium is practicable. We want to be action-oriented. We want you to put this information and knowledge to use and to work. And that's why we focused on including a wide variety of perspectives on all of our panels. Tribal leaders, community activists, on-the-ground cultural practitioners, academics, government officials, and yes, of course, lawyers. No one role is more important than the other in working towards our shared goals. Sorry, I've done a better job of that. Our shared goal of rebuilding crucial relationships between people, animal relatives, plant relatives, and the lands and waters that sustain all of us. Environmental issues cannot be disentangled from issues of social justice. This is especially true in the context of biodiversity conservation and protected public lands, when Indigenous peoples were violently forced out of their homelands by the United States government to create artificial wilderness for the American public to enjoy. But the most pressing environmental issues of our time, which includes climate change and biodiversity loss, require us to think expansively and creatively, and to develop intersectional policy solutions that center Indigenous peoples' rights and environmental justice. Addressing conservation goals and Indigenous peoples' rights to their ancestral lands need not be mutually exclusive. We know that they're mutually reinforcing. We hope that the conversations in this symposium demonstrate how effective Indigenous land stewardship has been historically in protecting our lands and waters, and the central role that it must play in our collective future. Before I close, I need to acknowledge and thank the people who helped make this symposium come to life. First, an enormous thank you to all of our speakers and panelists, and additionally, our IPLP and university faculty who are serving as our moderators. We are lucky to be at a university, and particularly at a law school, where we have the opportunity to learn from an incredible group of Indigenous law and Indigenous studies specialists. I would also like to thank the board and the other students in AJELP, especially Editor-in-Chief Annalisa Steen, who came to me last semester with the idea to have this symposium and who has worked tirelessly to make it happen. Thank you to our co-sponsoring student organizations, the Native American Law Students Association and the Environmental Law Society. Thank you to our other sponsors, including the IPLP program, and especially to Dustin Borrow, who has had to deal with a never-ending stream of emails from me over the past months. Thank you also to Daniel Sestiaga and the Indigenous Resilience Center, which provided us with a grant that took the symposium from an idea to reality. Thank you to the Agnes Nelms Howry Program in Environmental and Social Justice, the Udall Center for Public Policy, the Native Nations Institute, the College of Law Diversity Committee, and the University Office of the Provost. Thank you to the law school's amazing facilities team and to the law school's tech team, whose work is allowing us to share the symposium with a worldwide audience. And thank you once again to everyone who is here in this room with us and everyone who is watching on Zoom. We hope that this symposium sparks conversations that turn into collective action to return lands to Indigenous stewardship. I'm now happy, oh, one more thing, housekeeping, almost forgot. So two things for people who are here in person. The microphone setup that we have in this room is very high tech and advanced, and that's good for the people watching on Zoom. But what that means is that if you have any sort of side conversation, it will get picked up by the microphones. So while you're in here, we just ask that you refrain from talking to your neighbors, if that's possible. And there was something else that I can't remember, but that's okay. Yeah. I am now to pass it off to a representative from one of our co-sponsoring organizations, the Native American Law Student Association, their treasurer, Sinai Avila.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Sinai. Thank you, Rebecca and Elisa. I'm also part of AJELP, but I in no way took as much leadership in the creation of and accomplishment of the symposium. But thank you so much for really having our students, part of the Native American Law Student Association, contribute everything from ideas about speakers. I know that our president has many connections with the Native American community here too. And he was also participating in creating the agenda. And many of our members are also volunteering throughout the event. So many of our members, majority are Indigenous law students. So for us to be able to have spaces like this is an example of why we chose to come to this university specifically, because we knew that they do have an Indigenous people's law and policy program. We knew that we would be able to have the allies who would be interested in the creation of events like these. So thank you so much to the community, to the speakers who are here. Thank you so much to Dorothy FireCloud for being able to join us today, this evening. I know that it's late on the East Coast, but thank you so much once again. We're excited. You'll see me around tomorrow volunteering. So yeah, feel free to ask us any questions if you have more information about how you can support the Native American Law Student Association. We do have an art auction that I do need to pitch, by the way. It's our annual fundraiser. We every year we're able to bring in different Indigenous artists, and it's the way that we're able to raise the most money for the incoming school board that's starting in the fall. And this money is able to help us create different workshops, different speakers, different activities. So yes, please keep an eye out on that. We'll be sharing more information. And I want to be able to introduce Christina next. She's from the Pascua Yaqui tribe, and she's going to be helping us open up in prayer today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christina. My Indigenous name is Redstone. And I just want to say thank you again for having me again. It's a good feeling to be a part of something bigger and seeing something different, outside of us fighting, like feeling like we fight on our own and stuff, but to see you guys step in and be like, we're here, we have your back, so I really appreciate everything you guys are all doing. So, start with the prayer. Come to you today, Creator, that you help these people here. Continue to bless them, give them clarity, give them strength, give them understanding, no matter the journey that they take and what road they choose. I pray today that you watch over everyone coming and going, and for the people who couldn't make it today and the people who are going to come tomorrow, that they have a safe travels and safe journeys, to always have that fight in them, to always have that strength for the people, for each other, and for the unity. I pray that, I come to you as pitiful human beings, and, we ask that you just keep your blessings coming, and, you bless those ones that are in school, the ones that are trying to get into school, the ones that are fighting for education, the ones that are fighting for rights, the ones that are fighting for the people who can't fight. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. I'm James Diamond, and I'm the interim director of the Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy Program here at the College of Law. And so on behalf of the University of Arizona and its faculty and administration, and on behalf of the law school and its faculty and administration, and on behalf of the Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy Program, I want to welcome you and are so glad that you're here to participate in this very, very important symposium. I'm very, very proud of our students that have worked to get this organized, and appreciative of our faculty that will be participating and speaking throughout the next 2 days. Sinai mentioned the students at the Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy Program. And in fact, we have this year, we have in our JD program, Indigenous students from 17 tribal nations studying to be attorneys. Students come to us from all over the world to study and participate in scholarship. We have a doctoral program, the SJD program, the LLM program. Our SJD program this year alone has 16 students who are doing work on a dissertation in Indigenous law. And they come to us from Uganda, Kenya, India, Australia, US, and Canada, and 7 tribal nations. In fact, we do have a program with JD, Bachelor of Arts with an emphasis in Indigenous law and policy, LLM, SJD, Masters in Professional Studies. And so we have a very vibrant program here. Just a little background on us, because I'm proud of us. The IPLP, the Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy Program, was founded by none other than Vine Deloria 3 decades ago. Professor Deloria believe that you educate future Indigenous leaders and scholars, and that they bring back knowledge to their community. In fact, we'll be talking about that at the symposium. We recruited Rob Williams, who has led our program for decades, and with assistance from co-directors James Anaya and Rebecca Sosi, and teaching these students that you'll be learning from here the next 2 days. We have cutting edge clinical programs where our students are working with tribal communities throughout the world. And we're very proud as well. We'll hear from the United Nations Special Rapporteur, Khalid. We're very proud that we now have our second United Nations Special Rapporteur for Indigenous Peoples in residence here at the law school. This symposium, is vital. What Rebecca said, I think, just thinking about that, the ecology from the Pope, the role of the Catholic Church in colonization and brutal treatment of Indigenous peoples. It's sort of like, you say, that just happened now. What took so long? What took so long for the, the recognition of the Catholic Church on its role in destruction of community, based on a belief that, the church had an obligation to punish sinners. Moving from that though to the next step, right? What do we do next? Is a perfect segue really into to the work of this symposium, and a recognition, that is so common among Indigenous peoples, that everything is interrelated. All animals, plants, humans, the water, the air are dependent on one another, and that when any one of those go out of balance, we all go out of balance, and that really, I think, is vital to remember. So I'm so proud of our students. I know that you're going to enjoy the symposium. I just wanted to say welcome and thank you to all. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I promise this is the last of the many introductions. My name is Anna Christine. I'm the editor of Environmental Law and Policy. I'm so happy to see so many people here today, and to all of you on Zoom. I can't see you, but I feel your energy. So thank you for coming. We are deeply honored to welcome our keynote speaker, Dorothy FireCloud. Miss FireCloud is a member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe and is the current Native American Affairs Liaison Director of the National Park Service. It is fitting that we begin this symposium with remarks by Ms. FireCloud. Work over the last 30 or so years has been dedicated to restoring and protecting Indigenous peoples' relationships with their ancestral homelands, and to ensuring that the federal government, particularly its land managing agency, fulfills its trust responsibilities to Native nations. Ms. FireCloud has advocated for Indigenous peoples from within various roles in the BIA, United States Forest Service, and since 2006, the National Park Service. She served as superintendent of Devil's Tower National Monument and Montezuma Castle and Tezigut National Monuments. Prior to her time in the National Park Service, Ms. FireCloud held several positions in the U.S. Forest Service, including acting district ranger at Tongass National Forest, acting deputy forest supervisor at Black Hills National Forest, and acting director for the Tribal Relations Program in Washington, D.C. She also served as the USFS Southwest Tribal Program Manager and as the team leader of the National Implementation Team on Tribal Relations. And as this room is filled with many legal professionals, both aspiring and fully fledged, you will be happy to hear that Ms. FireCloud also has a JD from New Mexico University, New Mexico School of Law, and has been barred in New Mexico since 1991. Ms. FireCloud, on a personal note, I am particularly honored to be hosting you this evening. Prior to law school, I actually worked for the National Park Service couple NPS uniforms, making me a little bit nostalgic. I work in Sequoia and Kings National Park. Sequoia King. Oof, okay, I'll try that again. I worked in Sequoia and Canyon National Parks for about 10 seasons. I actually started volunteering for the Park Service when I was about 15. I was a trail trekker. It's very exciting. And my work with the Park Service is really what brought me to law school. It's why I'm here. It's exactly the type of work that I want to do, advocate for Indigenous peoples, particularly in the realm of federal land management. So I'm just so honored that you're here this evening to speak with us. Lastly, as many of you know, Director Charles F was hoping to join us tonight. Unfortunately, he had a conflict come up, but he did do a recording for us, which is very wonderful. So we will play that recording for you here right now. And then Ms. FireCloud, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Hello, and I'm Yuma. And Asha Wanasha Shashkalashwit, Ewa Kanishnak Nui Luma, to Chumna Nehiawepum. Good day, my friends and relatives. My Indian name is Mockingbird with Big Heart. My English name is Chuck Sams, and I serve as the 19th Director of the National Park Service. I come from the place of Big Springs on the Umatilla Indian Reservation. Your symposium on Indigenous lands is so very important, and I am so sorry that I cannot join you today. The work that each of you do around understanding how American law has both worked for and against American Indians is extremely important, and the work that we continue to do to ensure that the United States fulfills its full trust responsibility. I myself hold a master's in Indigenous Peoples Law from the University of Oklahoma, and it's important to me to understand those relationships that we've had with the United States, both pre-contact, contact, colonial, up to the present, and how both international and US law play itself out. But more importantly, it's bringing together tribal law and mixing those together to understand the full concepts of what it means to be good stewards of the land. So I wish you a good conference and a good symposium. And again, I'm so sorry I won't be able to join you this year, but hopefully next.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Annalisa had told you earlier, my name is Dorothy FireCloud, and I am a member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe in South Dakota. And in one thing, I ended up taking this position about 2 years ago before Director Sams came on board, and it's really been my honor to serve in this position, especially with him being the first Native American Park Service Director. And I regret too that he isn't able to attend, as he's an amazing speaker and he can connect to his audiences in a way that not many people can, especially being a law professor. But it has been a wonderful experience for me to be able to watch how he works through the federal system and is able to navigate its complexities and get as much accomplished as he has within a very short period of time. As you're all aware, no matter which of the 424 National Park Service units you are on, all 85 million acres of it is ancestral homelands to Indigenous peoples. They were the first stewards of these lands for centuries prior to the establishment of the National Park Service. Currently, many national parks are working with affiliated tribes and tribal members to tell a more complete and accurate history and consulting with the tribes in planning new exhibits. These exhibits will directly incorporate tribal voices, showcase important Indigenous connections, encourage visitors to see the parks not only as beautiful natural settings, but also as places where Native peoples hold strong historical and contemporary connections. Unfortunately, Indigenous people feel they are largely invisible in the United States and its territories. This is due to the fact that we as a country don't tell that complete and accurate history. We do not tell the stories of the civil rights movement of tribal people within the United States, with the exception of the short 19-month occupation at Alcatraz. and that has only recently been added to the interpretation at the island. People are not fully aware that tribal people stories go beyond the end of the Indian Wars. So with that, I'll turn to the topic of today's seminar, which I really wish that I had heard about this earlier because I would have joined in all day tomorrow. So I think I'm going to pop in and out because there's some really awesome panels that you have put together. So, and I'll be leaving some time at the end of today's talk for questions and answers, because Director Sams, I think, had originally set it up because he likes to do more of an interactive kind of keynote. But I thought I would go ahead and give you a brief update of some of the projects that we're working on within the National Park Service in regard to co-stewardship. So the Department of Interior and its bureaus play a central role in how the United States stewards its public lands, increases environmental protections, and pursues environmental justice, and how we tell those stories and honor our nation-to-nation relationship with tribes. To help meet the many challenges associated with these issues, Director Sams has made it one of his 7 priorities to strengthen the government-to-government relationship with sovereign nations. We understand that tribal sovereignty and tribal self-governance, as well as honoring the federal trust responsibility to tribal nations, is the cornerstone of all federal Indian policy. Tribal people have for centuries been stewards of all of these lands and hold vast traditional knowledge of these landscapes. And it is imperative that we recognize that knowledge and welcome its use in the management of all National Park Service sites. In addition, numerous treaties, statutes, and policies give tribes a unique role in working with the National Park Service through conservation work on public lands. The Department of Interior, along with several other agencies through the White House Council on Native American Affairs, recently renewed the 2012 MOUs on both treaty reserved rights as well as sacred sites. And I'm not going to go into any of that further because I saw that Morgan Rodman is from the White House Council is on one of the panels tomorrow afternoon. And he's really the subject matter expert on that. On September 12, 2022, Secretary Holland announced new guidance to improve federal stewardship of public lands, waters, and wildlife by strengthening the role of tribal governments in federal land management. And in conjunction with that announcement, Director Sam signed a new NPS policy memorandum 22-03, which outlines how the National Park Service will facilitate, support, and work with tribes to collaborate in the co-stewardship of federal lands and waters located within NPS units. The policy memorandum covers relationship building with Indian tribes, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiian communities, how to enter into collaborative, cooperative, and annual 638 funding agreements, access to and protection of sacred sites, tribal expertise and Indigenous knowledge, treaty rights and trust responsibilities of the National Park Service, as well as training and competencies required by the National Park Service staff, who will have these duties within their respective positions. This new National Park Service guidance will help park managers and superintendents to collaborate with Indian tribes, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians to ensure that they have an integral role in the co-stewardship of these parks. The National Park Service has been ahead of the curve of federal land management agencies in coordinating with tribal nations. However, this new policy places a greater emphasis on working beyond the traditional framework of consultation as equals in planning and management. The policy memorandum ensures that we are managing National Park Service lands and waters in a manner that will protect treaty, religious, subsistence, and cultural interests of federally recognized tribe, Alaska Native entities, corporations, and the Native Hawaiian communities. It establishes a consistent national framework for guiding the Park Service as it relates to our unique trust responsibility. The new policy memorandum sets up tribal consultation expectations and is a step forward in development of an NPS-specific tribal consultation policy. To date, we have worked under the umbrella of the DOI policy. However, Director Sams feels that we would have a better understanding of expectations as to tribal consultation if the policy is within the National Park Service specific policy manual. Once the tribal consultation policy is in place, we will begin working on a policy as to protection of sacred sites. But I think one of the biggest questions as to the new Park Service policy memorandum is exactly what is co-stewardship and how does that relate to co-management? A lot of times the terms have been used interchangeably, when in actuality, co-stewardship can be viewed as the umbrella with co-management, collaborative, cooperative, and 638 self-determination funding agreements, all falling under that co-stewardship umbrella. So co-management has been really narrowly defined as it requiring a nexus to the park unit in order for there to be true co-management. And that was defined in former Secretary Jewell's Secretary Order 3342 on partnerships with tribes. So we currently have ability to do co-management in only 4 National Park Service units. Those units are first Canyon de Chelly National Monument in New Mexico. And the land within the park is actually owned by the Navajo Nation, and the park itself lies within the exterior boundaries of the Navajo Reservation. We will be holding meetings beginning next week with the nation and several of its chapter houses to begin discussions on how they will do or how they would like to do co-management within the park unit. Second, Big Cypress National Preserve in Florida with the Seminole Tribe, which is also at the very beginning stages of negotiation. The tribe is hosting a week-long event with the park at the end of this month to determine how they will begin to implement and institutionalize co-management. Third, Grand Portage National Monument in Upper Minnesota with the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, which is the park that does the most 638 self-governance agreements. The tribe donated about half of the land for the park unit to be established, and the park is also within the tribe's exterior boundaries. And the last part to have co-management legislation attached in 2014 is Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve in Southeast Alaska with the Hunnic Tlingit for the gathering of seagull eggs within park boundaries. For decades, Huna tribal members watched the Park Service bring in feral pigs to eat the seagull eggs, which was an important part of their subsistence, and they were not allowed to gather within park boundaries. With the establishment of the park in 1925 and implementation of laws and park regulations, this led to a period of alienation and strained relationships between the Tlingit people and the National Park Service. In recent years, the National Park Service and Huna tribal government have worked cooperatively to reinvigorate traditional activities, develop cultural programs for youth and adults, amend regulations for a broader range of traditional harvests within park boundaries, and to preserve oral histories. I think the most symbolic venture was in 2016 with the building of the Huna Ancestors House on the shores of the park. The building reflects a traditional architectural style reminiscent of ancestral clan houses, but is suitable for the needs of the community today. The interior painted panel depicts the stories of the 4 primary Huna clans, and in 2017, totem poles were installed to flank the building. In the last fiscal year, the National Park Service has 638 self-governance funding agreements in place with 5 tribes obligating over $3 million, which provides a significant boost to the respective tribal economies. The longest running of these agreements, as mentioned above, is that with the Grand Portage National Monument and the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. Since Grand Portage National Monument was first established in 1960, approximately $40 million has gone back into the tribal economy through these funding agreements. And the tribe has also recently begun completing projects at Isle Royale National Park, which is located within Lake Superior. Another agreement is at River Raisin National Battlefield, which is just south of Detroit. And it has had several years of successful co-stewardship projects with the Wyandot Nation, primarily to assist in interpretation of the tribal history when it comes to the various battles that were held in the area, as well as several tribal youth projects. Via Caldera National Preserve in New Mexico has an agreement in place with the Pueblo of Santa Clara, primarily for road and trail maintenance, and much of this is being accomplished by tribal youth crews. At Redwood National Park, several agreements are in place with the Yurok tribe, and they have been doing some fascinating projects together. The first is reintroduction of the condor with the first releases that were done last spring, and also using traditional knowledge to study the Roosevelt elk herds within the park and determine how to increase those herd sizes within those ancestral homelands. And the park is also in negotiations with the Tola Dene Nation, the Elk Valley Rancheria, and Wisigny Rancheria on co-stewardship agreements. And Redwood has also recently signed an agreement to provide funding to the Yurok tribe for training, experience, and leadership development in wildland fire management for Yurok tribal women. The end result of the agreement would be to roster an all tribal female National Park Service fire crew, which would be the first of its kind within the National Park Service. And I'm also going to give you some examples of some successful co-stewardship, collaborative, and cooperative agreements which we have in place currently. First, I will talk about incorporation of Indigenous knowledge with one of our park projects. In 2012, the National Park Service determined that it would be in its best interest to develop a plant gathering regulation for tribal people to gather traditional plants within National Park Service sites. The first of the consultation meetings on the proposed regulation was held at Acadia National Park in Maine. Acadia had decided to get a head start by working with the Wabanaki Confederacy to determine which plants they might be interested in prior to the plant gathering regulation passing. It was determined after many meetings that the tribes would focus on gathering a sweetgrass, as they no longer had access to any sites for gathering, as all the lands where they had previously gathered were now held either in public or private holdings. The first year, the NPS biologists identified the plots for gathering purposes. The traditional gatherers then came into the park to identify their own, and they discovered that the plots that had been identified by the biologists were not areas that they would use for harvesting. So the traditional gatherers then identified their own plots from which they would gather. After the third year, the NPS biologists gave up on the NPS plots, as the plots that had been identified and had been gathered by the traditional gatherers were coming back at a rate of 30 to 50% greater than those that had been identified by the National Park Service. The park staff were also able to spend time with the gatherers to learn about traditional ways of gathering and to use that information with the gatherers' permission to assist park interpreters in providing accurate information to park visitors. And it also proved that incorporation of traditional knowledge at the very earliest in projects is the best management practice. And as to protection and access to sacred sites, the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area has been working with a group of Dakota nations on several projects related to Mini-Oshni, otherwise known as Coldwater Spring, a park unit and tribal sacred site located adjacent to Fort Snelling in South Minneapolis near the airport. In collaboration, the park and the tribes have drafted a traditional cultural property nomination for the site, collaboratively overhauled the park's landscape restoration work to feature traditionally significant species, including Dakota language identification signs, and is partnering to create new interpretive content and programming that features appropriate Dakota traditional and cultural knowledge for public and tribal audiences. At Pipestone National Monument, they have held several large tribal consultations with tribes over the past few years, with discussions on co-stewardship around the former Pipestone Indian boarding school, as well as quarry protocols. The park is in the process of hiring a Mellon Fellow who will research the boarding school era, which will include interviewing former students and their families. And Pipestone is one of 2 NPS sites, which are also former Indian boarding school sites. In California at Joshua Tree National Park and the with Joshua Tree National Park and the 29 Palms Band of Mission Indians, recently entered into an agreement at the end of last year to work cooperatively on the Chemehuevi Indian burial, ground surveillance and security, on radio communications, on RV park interpretation and guest services, staff training, transportation services, as well as law enforcement, fire, search and rescue operations, and trailhead establishment and coordination, cultural center management and interpretation activities, as well as working together on the Desert Tortoise Sanctuary and Rehabilitation Program. And so that was a huge success, which both the park and the tribe were able to celebrate at the end of the year. These are just a few examples of what the National Park Service and tribes are doing for co-stewardship projects. All are highly significant and successful to the tribes and the parks involved. Through the use of traditional knowledge in these projects, it has really added to the overall effectiveness. So co-stewardship is not new to the National Park Service. However, the new policy memorandum provides an opportunity to expand many of these projects to parks which have not been working as closely with tribes as, say, like with Redwood. Within the past several months, we've had several name changes, one specifically at Redwood and another at Grand Canyon National Park. Grand Canyon National Park had removed the remaining Havasupai people who live just below the rim of the Grand Canyon when it became a national park. At the end of last year, the name of the area where they lived was renamed Havasupai Gardens from the name it had, which was Indian Gardens. And this new name was determined by the Havasupai tribe themselves. So the Grand Canyon is also dedicating the entire eastern end of the park at the Desert View Tower area, as well as Tucson ruins, to telling the tribal story through the hiring of National Park Service tribal park rangers, as well as having tribal vendors and demonstrators being the people that would be telling the stories there. And since the vast majority of you are there in Arizona, I would really encourage you to take a trip up there and see what the changes that they have made to date. It's really encouraging. At Redwoods, again, the Tolowa Dene Nation and the park are installing new signage to acknowledge the original Tolowa name of Peacock Bar, which translates to "at the stones where the trail descends downward." The acknowledgement and use of the original name for the site reflects the first inhabitants and is a step in correcting the historical narrative. And the National Park Service is actually facilitating the Reconciliation Committee, which Secretary Holland authorized in Secretarial Order 3405 to look at derogatory names of sites on federal lands. The first face-to-face meeting of the committee will be held in June. So in conclusion, I would like to reiterate that first, conservation and interpretation of these lands is a shared responsibility, and we need to work together in order to truly be successful. Relationships, knowledge sharing, and co-stewardship with Indigenous peoples is essential to our mission of preservation and protection within the National Park Service system. We recognize the need to continue building strong, healthy relationships with Indigenous people that are rooted in meaningful two-way dialogue so that we can work together to improve and enhance our mutual conservation and interpretive commitments. We have experienced some significant successes, but also acknowledge that we still have a long road ahead of us. The Park Service is committed to continuing to enhance our efforts to listen and work hand in hand with Indigenous people through incorporation of Indigenous knowledge, experience, and perspectives of tribes in managing natural and cultural resources within the National Park Service. I will end today with a quote from Director Sams about the new NPS co-stewardship policy memorandum. All national parks are located on Indigenous ancestral lands, and this policy will help ensure tribal governments have an equal voice in the planning and management of them. I know this will empower National Park Service staff to be able to go out and have stronger, less transactional, and more transformational relationships with tribes, tribal governments, and tribal communities on how they can use traditional ecological knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, and to better manage these resources not just for ourselves, but for our children's children. So with that, I'll open it up to questions so that can become a little bit more interactive.
Thank you very much. Okay, so for in-person questions, we have two Intel mics. If you're in the room, like what question is going to ask, come down to the lower step on either side, and then we'll get to the mic. And we're going to go back and forth between in-person online.
I'm having a hard time hearing you. You might want to hold the microphone like closer.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, I was just describing the question asking process. So yeah, if you have questions, you can come down here to the front, and then we'll also monitor chat Q&A function.
Oh, quick question. Can I just ask? I just want to know stewardship and co-management, if she can just go with them.
Did you hear that question? We had a question in the room about if you could go over one more time the distinction between co-stewardship and co-management.
Okay. So co-stewardship is like the umbrella over all of the different ways that it can be done. Co-management falls under co-stewardship. Co-management is really narrowly defined in Secretarial Order 3342, which was put in place by Secretary Jewell, and it talks about working with tribes and to doing partnerships with tribes. And in there, the solicitor's office put in a very narrow definition that there has to be some type of a legal nexus, either through the park legislation or its enabling act. And so right now, we think we only have 4, but we have one of the park staff is working to go through all of the legislative and enabling legislation of all 424 park units to ensure that that there isn't one that we've missed.
I think we're going to need people to go up to the microphone over there because people online are having a really hard time hearing. So that green glowing thing is a microphone. I can also repeat the questions too. Danny, do you want to come up here?
I guess I'm
Yeah.
All right. Oh. Can everyone hear me? All right, I have a voice. How is the National Park Service working to ensure consistent access to Indigenous religious sites on NPS land?
I wasn't able to hear you. Can you hold the microphone closer?
That way?
I think it's that way.
Okay, here, try this one. I don't know. I think it's just better to use the green.
I'm sure.
Sorry, technical difficulties.
All right. Hi. How is the National Park Service and working to ensure consistent access to Indigenous religious sites on NPS land?
Okay, yeah. One of the things that Director Sams has asked me to do, and one of the things, so my position was kind of like put on hold for a while, and then I was hired just a couple of years ago. And so I don't have any staff. So I have, but this year we did get funding for my office. And so we'll be getting ready to hire for additional staff members here within the next several months. So we'll be advertising, and this will be open to everyone. We'll be looking for a GS-14 tribal liaison, a GS-13 tribal liaison, a GS-13 policy analyst, and a 9/11 admin assistant. So if anybody is looking for jobs out there, they'll be coming out soon. But in regard to that one, we're currently working on development of the NPS specific tribal consultation policy. And as soon as we're done with that, which I'm thinking will be within the next 4 to 6 weeks, and then it's going to go out for tribal consultation and a few other things. But as far as my office working on it, we'll be done with our portion of it at that time. And we're going to begin developing a policy specific to sacred sites management within the national parks. And we'll be working with the tribes as far as that is concerned. And there should be open access to all sacred sites within the National Park Service lands. And if there's not, please feel free to give me a call and we can work with any of the superintendents that may be having issues.
Thank you.
I think we have a couple. Right? Yeah, I'll switch to one of the online questions. I think I can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So one of our questions from online is how does the new co-management memorandum address unrecognized tribes like many in California and the East Coast who have historic and ancestral relations with national park land? And that was actually asked a few different times so far.
Well, one of the things that Secretary Holland did was that she specifically put in the secretarial order was one line there that talked about the ability to work with non-federally recognized or state recognized tribes. And so although we don't have the same federal trust responsibility with those tribes, we will work as closely with them as possible.
Thanks. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm curious how the memorandum addresses tribes that might be split by the international border, like the Tana Autumn. They have members in the south of the border and the north. So when trying to create co-management or co-stewardship relationships with the National Park Service, how do you include, or I guess when you have that situation, how does that impact that?
Yeah,
Thank you.
unfortunately, it doesn't address that, but we do have some National Park Service employees that are working on the International Borders Work Group with the White House Council on Native American Affairs. So we're kind of looking into that. Our regional tribal liaison in the Northeast region has both dual citizenship in Canada as well as with the United States. And he is an attorney as well. And so we're really looking closely at how those types of issues can be worked out. He's one of the people that's on that work group, and the other person that's on that work group is Scott Stoneham, who's the superintendent down at, it just went over my head, down on the board with Mexico. Yeah, so we're addressing those issues, but it's not specifically addressed in the memorandum.
Yeah, Shay Clay O'Brien, the Indigenous. Yeah. Hello, good evening, and thank you for having us. I just wanted to ask a question about accessibility, most specifically tribal members and families being having access to national parks. And as we further understood from the COVID-19 pandemic and scrutinized the inequities of how some of these trips and experiences that some are able to have, what is NPS doing to allow access to it? Is there a way, aside from ceremonial uses for tribal nations, to get free access to a lot of these parks?
Well, we're getting ready to, we did have one internal memorandum that went out to the park superintendents. So it should be easier for tribal people when you come up to the gate to show either your tribal ID or to say that you're a member of a tribal nation and get in without having to pay any fees. And if you do go up and have issues, have them give me a call. They should be able to call me right from the fee kiosk that you're at the gate.
Okay, thank you.
And we've got another question from online. And also for people asking questions, so the camera's up there, so I know it's a little awkward because she's over here, but you can talk to her by looking up there at that camera. So one question we had was if the National Park Service has a repository of executed co-stewardship agreements.
Yeah, I'm that repository. I have pretty much all of the agreements, and we're actually developing tracking tools right now. So we've been working in between the one thing that's really that's done differently with this administration than ever before is that the Assistant Secretary for Fish, Wildlife and Parks and the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Indian Affairs are working very closely on everything that we're doing. And so right now, we're working with the Indian Affairs staff to figure out a tracking tool for all of these projects so that way they're able to not only track the Park Service, but Fish and Wildlife, BLM, and any of the other Department of Interior agencies as far as those. But I do have copies of like all the agreements I talked about today, and then I think some other ones as well. And the only one that I've been asked not to share that you would actually have to go to the tribe to get permission are those with Grand Portage National Monument, because there's some financial information within the agreement that the tribe doesn't want us to release. But you could go, to the tribe and I think they would give you redacted copies.
Professor Engel.
Thank you. And I'm Kirsten Engel. I'm one of the faculty, very proud faculty advisors to the Arizona Journal of Environmental Law and Policy. And I wanted to thank you so much for being here. My question, I really loved your story about the tribal members coming to Acadia National Park and how much more they knew than the National Park Service biologists. So I was wondering, is there anything in the agreement that you've been describing or in policy where the National Park Service can take advantage of this knowledge, this indigenous knowledge, and make sure that it is kept and communicated to others? So it's not just a one-time thing that we learn from it.
Yeah, well, so unfortunately, we don't have means to protect that information. So we try not to keep it like internally, but for projects such as this, we do share that information among all the parks. And with this project, it's really kind of my favorite one. So I've had them on tour for the last year and a half, talking about the project to as many webinars and different things, because Suzanne Greenlaw, who was the head of the tribal gatherers, she's actually a professor but is a member of the Wabanaki Confederacy. So she was kind of the one who did the tribal side. And so her and the lady who worked for Park Service now works for Forest Service. So, so I've had them do, I think, like 4 or 5 different PowerPoint presentations and webinars and stuff, because it's such a powerful story, and can really show how critical inclusion of traditional knowledge is at that very early stage. So, yeah, so everyone, who I can talk to, and one of the things that we are doing is when we had the plant gathering rule passed, and I think it was 2016, then we ended up having a lot of complaints, both internally from parks as well as tribes, about how cumbersome the process is. So that's one of the things that Director Sams is having us do, is taking a look at that and looking at ways that we can just internally have people kind of relax the requirements, because like Hopi has said that they would never enter into an agreement with us, because one of the requirements is to identify who all the people will be that come along, and some of their societies are secretive, so not everyone within the tribe even knows who are members of those. So, things like that we can actually change and make it not so cumbersome, both for the parks. So a lot of the parks have actively been doing workarounds to avoid having to do like the EA, and all of the other requirements. So we're working on making it a little bit more user-friendly for both the tribes and the parks.
Thank you.
So going back to another few questions from our Zoom audience. One is a question about if there are any co-stewardship actions preserving basket weaving sites and materials in California.
Not that I'm active. Well, let's see. I know they had, let's see, Pinnacles and Sequoia had been working with a couple of tribes for a number of years. And I don't think it's active anymore, but they had actually been working with basket weavers to do kind of like prescribed burns in different areas where the gatherers were coming in to gather the materials that they would use for those basketries. So if that person, or if anybody wants to write me, my email address is Dorothy_FireCloud@nps.gov. And I can send you documentation that talks about those various projects.
And we can make sure that we put that
Oh, okay, I can put it in the email.
into the chat as well. Another question that we got from Zoom is, it is my understanding that employees and members of the Tlingit community are referring to Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve as Glacier Bay Homeland. This paints a very different understanding of land relations. Do you think a reframing like homeland is possible for other parks?
Yeah, and I think it's just taking a desire between working with the park superintendent and the tribes to do, similar activities. And so it's, so I would recommend for the tribes to go meet with the park, to write to this park superintendent, or, just call them up and, tell them what you're interested in doing. And I don't know of any park superintendent that wouldn't be willing to work with the tribes right now. And if issues do come up, write me at my email or give me a call too.
Thank you again for answering our questions. I'm curious about, you mentioned a park site that had a tribal land donated to it. And I'm curious if you could expand on that a little bit. Was it the original state of that land part of the tribe, or was there already an existing park there? Was it controversial?
No.
Just go off.
That was at Grand Portage National Monument, and the tribe donated half of the lands that the monument has to date, and it belonged to the tribe, and the tribe donated. There's other, so like at Canyon de Chelly, all of the land within the park is still owned by the Navajo Nation. And so, even within the exterior boundaries, we just manage it. And so, we're going to go meet, and it seems like almost like counterintuitive. We're going to meet with the landowners to have them negotiate with us about how to do co-management of their lands. So some of those things, it's kind of strange. Up at Bighorn Canyon in Montana, when the park was established, the Crow tribe had agreed to not donate, but to actually have like about 56,000 acres of Crow tribal lands become a part of the park unit. And now the tribe is looking to get that land back, and it's still theirs. It's still held in trust for the tribe. It would just make the boundaries of the park unit smaller. So,
We have another question coming. It's just coming from the back, so he has to run up here.
Thank you so much for joining us here. Knox and Sykes and Swash Nuichlin at Tidna Pumpkin. Hello, my name is Dylan, and I'm Cowlitz. I wanted to ask, you talked a couple times about gathering and plant gathering, and with respect to the co-stewardship. And I'm wondering if you could maybe touch a little bit on subsistence hunting and fishing, whether it's been reserved in the form of a treaty or not. And if there's been any sort of movement or discussion, between tribes and NPS with respect to hunting and fishing. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, and like up at Apostle Island, Glyphwork works in that area, and there's several other tribes, and I can't think of them right off, that do have hunting rights within National Park Service units. And we're also, one of the things that we're working on with the Bureau of Indian Affairs is developing a map that would be an overlay of the treaty maps with the National Park Service units. And then we're working closely with our solicitor's office to then really determine what rights each, for where the overlay is, what treaty rights are there that the National Park Service really needs to work with the tribes on, and to ensure that those treaty rights are being met. So we're not there yet, we're working on it.
Hello, Miss. Oh boy, sorry. So I'm a little nervous. My name is Cam Juarez. I am the community engagement coordinator for Saguaro National Park. Greetings from here. As my colleague likes to say, or has been teaching me, is Skook Orenek, if I got that correctly, and that's good evening, the traditional language of the autumn. So two questions. Part of what I do is essentially getting the park, Saguaro National Park, out to the people, and then engaging the people to come back to the park. One of the big things that we have here, traditionally, I think the Tohono people and the Pasquayaki are well aware of Saguaro National Park and what it represents. But a lot of community members that sometimes have mothers or fathers that are from those communities, but are intermarried with Mexicanos or white folk, or whatever the case is, sometimes they're just unaware of the park. And so our role is to create that awareness and to create meaningful engagements for folks to come back to the park, but also to engage in stewardship. What we found out is that because we don't have a lot of those faces at the park that represent their communities, it's harder for them to connect. So our focus has been on recruiting young people by way of internship that is paid for predominantly through our friends group, Friends of Saguaro National Park. And thankfully, in 2015, they established that program, and we've graduated close to 80, 90 students that have participated in that. One of those students, actually two of those students, are here with us tonight. Miriam Cardenas, current Next Gen Ranger, and another one is Rishon Ramon, who just a few months ago became the first, to my knowledge, the first on-autumn park ranger at Saguaro National Park in 3 years. So I do want to acknowledge him here as well. I say all of this because the minute that Rishon joined our team as an intern, he started really kind of opening doors for us to engage with the on-autumn nation in a way that we had never been able to do before. And he's going beyond these areas now. One of the things that I heard Director Sam say in a conversation a few months ago was that he was making every effort along with the agency to try to remove barriers to hiring. Everybody tells me when they see us in uniform that their dream job is to become a park ranger, or they were, a park ranger for a while and went another way. Wink, wink. What the problem is that it's incredibly cumbersome to get through the hiring process, and even the positions themselves are hard to come by. Our program provides them with public land court credit, which is an excellent hiring authority. But really, we're looking for ways to continue to diversify the staffing. Scott Stoneham, the superintendent at Oregon Pipe that you were thinking about, he's also excellent at doing that kind of recruitment along the border. But our hope is that we can continue to expand and diversify, not take anybody's jobs, but really make more room at the table. How would you advise that we continue to do that and continue to create opportunities for other young people who are entering the workforce and the Park Service do that?
I would recommend working closely with Circle, which is the employee resource group for tribal employees. And I think if you work closely with them, we'll be able to develop like classes on how to do your application, how to go through USA jobs and do all of that, because it really gets cumbersome. And I think a lot of people give up after a while because of how hard it is to get through that system. But, and I know Ed Keeble up at the superintendent at Grand Canyon has worked to get, the remote duty stations, where he was able to get that expanded from 30 miles to 75 miles. So we could reach further out to include a couple other tribes that he would be able to then do direct hires from. But then the problem with that is that you can get the direct hires, but then they're stuck at that GS5 level. So then they still, it's like they can't progress upwards within the Park Service and have to still reapply for other jobs to do that. So Rita Moss, I know, is aware of this, and she's been looking at different ways that we could do that. And I know one of the topics that the White House Council on Native American Affairs is looking at is also Indian preference within other federal agencies besides the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and especially those with parks that, like on the Navajo Reservation, Canyon de Shade, the vast majority of the park staff there are Navajo, but taking it out to other parks as well, where we have a really close working relationship with tribes.
Thank you. The other thing that Director Sams had mentioned was removing some of those barriers, because the way we get promoted, of course, is by moving around, as you mentioned, to different park sites. But as members of the community, whether you're Latino or Indigenous or African American, a lot of the times these underrepresented communities find it much more difficult than their coworkers to move to different locations, to leave their communities. And Director Sams mentioned that there was an effort to try to remove that barrier by doing exactly that. One program that we did have that I am not entirely sure we continue to have, and I'm hoping that we see the return of it, is the Ancestral Ranger Program. Do you have any advice on that at all?
No, I haven't heard about that one, but yeah, give me a call, one of these days. I'm gonna,
I will do that.
Yeah, I'm on travel next week and then half of the week after, but give me a call and let's visit. And I may recruit you to help me get some.
I would love that. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I'll reach out to you on Teams.
I'll do it. Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
So just make sure you hold the microphone very close and stand in one place. So that should help with the audio. Thank you.
Good evening, Dorothy. My name is Karen Francis Begay. I currently serve as the Assistant Vice Provost for Native American Initiatives here at the University of Arizona. And prior to that role, I was also, I guess you could say, tribal liaison, tribal advisor to the president on Native American affairs for about 13 years. And so I'm really interested in learning more about your role as the tribal liaison and advisor in terms of the complexities involved in that job at a federal level. I also did my dissertation research on the tribal advisor role at historically white institutions. And so one of the greatest challenges we had was really around education and awareness about tribal sovereignty and a number of issues that impact our tribal community. So I'm kind of interested in just knowing whether that's the same for you, but also if that justifies then the increase of staffing that you're seeking right at this moment. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's one of, at the very beginning, I mentioned how awesome it was working with Director Sams, and then also Secretary Holland being in there. So it's really made my position be able to do a whole lot more, I think, than had I come in during a different administration or with a different director of the National Park Service. With him being a law professor on Indian law, it's really made a difference because he's actually developed a PowerPoint presentation that he gives to the National Leadership Council, as well as a couple of weeks ago, we were down in Pensacola, and he gave the presentation down there to all of the superintendents within the Southeast region, and just really focusing on what trust responsibility is, what it means to us as federal employees within the National Park Service, how we should be working with tribes. And so it's really made that part of the job much easier. The fact that he's, telling me, let's develop a consultation policy. When you're done with that, let's start working on a sacred sites policy, and all of these different things. And I know if it was a non-tribal NPS director that we wouldn't be getting pushed at that same, like, let's hurry up and get this done because, he doesn't know how long he's going to be there. And yeah, and so that's one of the things that, with hiring the additional staff, it's just bringing the positions back that had been in the office before. So I'll be getting the office back up to the same level of staffing that it had in prior years. And I'm the only one, I think, in any of the federal agencies that's just by myself. The rest have fairly substantial staffing in their offices. So that makes it pretty good. But yeah, it's really been a huge difference. And it's really made a difference with him being Native as far as how the other offices within the Washington office perceive my program. Yeah. And it was purposely, I was hired before Director Sams came on board, and the former acting National Park Service Director was David Bella, who is Hispanic background, and NPS Director Bella at that time purposely made the position be an assistant to the director so that it would ensure that everyone within the National Park Service saw how critical the work that we're doing is to the National Park Service.
We have another question from Zoom. How does a National Park Service or the Department of the Interior define land back? What are some examples or successes? And similarly, if you could speak on the co-management of Bears Ears National Monument and the role of the Intertribal Coalition.
Okay. Bears Ear is managed by the Bureau of Land Management, and Park Service doesn't have anything to do with that agreement that's been put in place. As far as land back, the only, like I talked about earlier with Little Bighorn, we're working with the Crow tribe to get that land back, even though it's their lands. And so we don't currently have any of the other agreements that we're looking at as far as land back issues within the National Park Service.
You have more online. I have a question for you, actually, if I can take the liberty of doing that.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what you've had a long career in the federal government and with the National Park Service.
Mhm.
I'm curious what keeps you going in that role, what makes you hopeful, and why you've chosen that path.
Okay. Can you, after hopeful, I didn't really get it.
Oh, I think I asked why you've chosen that path.
Oh, working within the federal government. Well, I had, let's see, when I went to law school, I really wasn't certain like where I was going to head off to, but right after I graduated from law school at UNM, which I know is, like the big rivalry between U of A and UNM, because both law schools are pretty awesome. I had gone to work. Well, I did an internship during law school with the U.S. Attorney's Office on water rights, and Herb Becker was the U.S. Attorney whose office I worked in right then. And so he worked on the Navajo water rights claim. We worked on the Zuni water rights claim. And the Hopi water rights claim. So I had really gotten my interest there. And then so when I graduated from law school, a position came open in the water rights program within the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the Phoenix office. So I started there and kind of worked with that program for a number of years. And one day I was walking by a fax machine, and there's a fax coming in, so I picked it up. And the U.S. Forest Service was looking to hire a regional tribal liaison in the Albuquerque office. And so I was in Phoenix and I really wanted to move back to Albuquerque. So I applied for that position and got it. So I was able to work there then with the regional office of the U.S. Forest Service for quite a number of years. And I got really disillusioned at the time that the San Francisco Peaks decision was made. And so we really had intended for it to be pulled back, but we were overruled, because I worked with the assistant regional forester at that time. And so we were kind of waiting for it to come into the office so that we could make the decision and have it pulled back and kind of give it a fresh look and have it the outcome would have been different. But we were overruled, and when the decision came in, the regional forester took it away from us and made the final decision about what it was about the snowball and how that would be completed. And so I really kind of got disillusioned at that time and started looking for other places to work. And then the National Park Service job up at Devil's Tower came open, and I had just been up there that year acting as the forest supervisor on the Black Hills National Forest. And then being from South Dakota, I had really had interest in protection of those sacred sites, and especially, with Macho Tupila being up there. And so applied for that. And fortunately, Gerard Baker, who is Mandan, Hidatsa, and Ripara, was the superintendent at Mount Rushmore at that time. And his brother, Paige Baker, was park superintendent at Badlands National Park. And so I applied, and then I was really fortunate enough to then be able to go over to the National Park Service as a superintendent there, and stayed there for quite a number of years until my son decided that he wanted to go to school at ASU. And so we had come down when he was a sophomore in high school, and he read a story about how beautiful the women were at ASU. So decided he wanted to go. So then I was like, all right. So then right about at that very same time, the superintendency position at Montezuma Castle and Tuzigoot opened up. So I applied for that, and then we moved down to Arizona, and then I was down there until just at the very end of 2020 when I got this position. But I mean, a lot of it really is, being able to work internally to try to get things to change. And it takes a long time. I mean, gosh, I've been at this almost 32 years now. And it just now seems like we're starting to make progress. And I'm right at the end of my career, but I'm really hopeful that, that younger people, like a lot of the people who are law students now, can then move forward with that. And the one really nice thing about working within the National Park Service is that no matter what kind of degree you have, no matter what kind of background, there's always some kind of a position within the National Park Service that you could work at. And it's really is a great place to work.
Thank you. I think we'll go with one more question and then wrap things up.
So the question we received on Zoom is, do you have any practical tips to share on how to get a co-stewardship agreement that will ultimately be approved by a federal agency?
Well, with the National Park Service, the way that you would begin the process is to write a letter from the tribe to the park superintendent. And then you just begin negotiations at that point. Like, what do you want? And like the Joshua Tree one, I mean, I was surprised when I first saw it at how many topics, the different objectives that they had. I think it's what I have the agreement right here. And there was like over 10 different, objectives for them to work on. Yeah. I mean, all the way down to interpretation to media inquiries, even where the parks and the tribes will work together, to incorporation of traditional knowledge. I mean, there isn't anything, what really limits it is anything that's inherently federal, then we can't do. But that, I mean, you can even negotiate on some of that stuff, because I think the only thing that you probably couldn't do would be, like the budget stuff and taking over, some of, that kinds of stuff. But yeah, anything else, I think that you could pretty much do. So we have an annual, it's called, in the Federal Register, we publish an annual non-BIA agency 638 self-governance notice. And it usually comes out about January or February. and it'll give you a listing. I think we have within the Park Service, we have like 32 different programs that have been identified as being able to do co-stewardship projects with. But even though it's limited, like within, we have like the 32 listed, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other programs that we could add on to that. So it really is within, it's really up to the park superintendent and the tribes of what they want to negotiate.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Let you know a bit later, where you are. For those of you in person, we have refreshments in the courtyard, so please eat. And for those of you online, hopefully we'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. for a full day of panel discussions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.